YouTube, and I'll record the audio also for Spotify. So, our class today, I think, is going to be. Oh, hello from France. Wa alaikum salam. Yeah, you do. You do sometimes threaten strongly worded emails. That is true. I have been threatened a couple times in regards to this class, but that's okay. We take it in stride, right? I know, I know it comes from a loving place. So I'm trying to see the best setup for my notes and stuff here. So, what we're gonna talk about today, um, I think is very interesting. Which sort of, well, I don't know if you mean me personally or at the class, but the class is gonna cover a couple different surahs. Hello, how you doing? But me personally, I've mentioned this before. I think my if I had to narrow it down and pick one surah, my favorite surah I think would be Surah An-Najm, which is 53, Surah 53, the star. I've always been very attracted to that surah, and I always feel like no matter what I learn from it, there's always more depths that I haven't figured out yet. It just seems very mysterious to me, very spiritual. I don't know. I just really like that surah. Okay, so let's get to, inshallah, our class today. So I was going to start off by saying our class today I think is going to be very interesting, but I think all of our classes are interesting. So what our class today, the topic of our class today is going to be a big one, but I want to share with you a couple verses at least to start us thinking about this concept. So the class today is going to cover the value of freedom in the Qur'an. The value of freedom in the Quran. Yes, the lote tree. That's what I'm saying. It's such a mysterious. Even the symbolism of the lote tree. I made a video about that before. Sidra. Why is it called Sidra? Potentially, and what spiritual implications does that have? But maybe that's something we can talk about. We'll do something sometime. Going back into Surah An-Najm. So today's class is the value of freedom in the Quran, and we're gonna look at mainly two verses. Right? We might add other verses as we always do. You know, we add other verses to help us explain the verses that we're studying. But our primary verses are going to be two verses. So I'm going to give you those verses now, and then Hannah could put them on the screen. So if you want to write them down now, these are the main two verses that we're going to be going over. We're going to be going over chapter 3, verse 35, and we're going to go over chapter 5, verse 20. And this is just something to get us started thinking about this concept. And I also want to give you an idea of why I'm going to these two verses and why I'm thinking about this concept, because I want to get all of our gears turning a little bit. So one of the things that if you've been a part of these classes for any amount of time, you know that I'm always, I'm a curious person, and in studying the Quran, I'm always like looking for different perspectives that I maybe haven't considered before. So one of my recent interests that I became really curious about is studying the concept of anarchy in relationship to the Quran. Now, anarchy gets a bad rap because people have come to interpret that word as meaning chaos, but it actually doesn't mean that. It's actually a philosophy. So currently I'm studying that. Salam. I'm studying that, and because we talk about, if you notice, how do I choose the verses? That's a good question. That probably would take a little bit of detail for me to explain, but I'll try to add that in there somewhere. So if you think about the ends of the words, right? If you think about rulership based on the male or the father, we call it patriarchy. If you think about wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If you think about rulership based upon the woman or the mother, we call it matriarchy. So then look how we have patriarchy, matriarchy, anarchy, right? See the relationship? So we have a lot of discussions about patriarchies and matriarchies and what's the best kind of government. So I'm recently considering what does the philosophy of anarchy have to say about what is the best kind of government, or the absence of government perhaps, and how does that relate to the Quran? And so far when I'm studying about it, I actually find a lot of correlations. Not everything that I'm finding I totally agree with, but I'm still in the beginning studying it. So as we go, it might not be all at one time, because it's just kind of something I'm studying on the side along with other things for other classes. But that will probably be something we'll talk about. We'll go back to from time to time. But that study is what kind of inspired me to think of a different perspective on these verses that we put on the screen, 335 and 520, and the idea of the value of freedom in the Quran. So at some point, what I would like to do, hopefully, is at some point, once I do enough studying about it, just kind of make it into one whole class and just go through the different points as far as the philosophy of anarchy and the relationship of the Quran. Now, there are some people who have already written books about that. Oh, subhanAllah, yeah. There's I can't remember his name right now, but he has a book. There's this author that has a book about anarchy in Islam. So there are some people that are talking about that. I haven't read the book, but when I listened to that guy, I was listening to him talk. Isa was an anarchist. Yes, subhanAllah, beautiful. But when I was listening to the guy who wrote that book, I felt that he's probably very intelligent and very well informed about anarchy, but I wasn't as impressed with his knowledge of the Quran. And I only listened to him for a little while, to be fair, and I haven't read his book. But it made me kind of just want to study it myself, because I'm not sure how good he was in like relating the concepts to the Quran. I don't know. I have to study it more to really determine that. So I'm just giving you some background to say why, we're studying this today, this idea of the value of freedom in the Quran. So starting with 335. 335 is very interesting. It's always been pretty interesting to me, but I started thinking about it today as from a different angle. So 335, let's read this. So this is about Imra'atu Imran. Oh, subhanAllah, that's good. That's interesting. So inshallah, as we study, hopefully you will contribute a lot to the class when you can. Even if you don't aren't always able to make it, you can like add notes and stuff. The book is, let me just see if I can look it up real quick. I don't remember his name. I might have to search it. Let me see if I can figure out who he is. Book, Islam and Anarchy. Let's see. I think this is it. Let's see. Yes, I found it. So his name is, hold on, I'll just write his name. Yeah, sorry, I could have done that, huh? Well, my researcher mind just sprung into action there. I didn't even wait. His name is Muhammad Abdu. Oh, look, he found it. We put it on the screen at the same time. And the book is entitled Islam and Anarchism, Relationships and Resonances. Yeah, no, that's an English book. It's English. It's called Islam and Anarchism, Relationships and Resonances. You read it. Oh, that's what I'm talking about. So, did you like it? What was your overall take from it? Yeah, for sure. Well, while I'm waiting for you, we'll go ahead and I'll read the verse and then I'll see your comment when it pops up. So, so this verse 335. Okay, so that's interesting. You didn't feel he was informed on the psychology of groupthink. That's interesting because when I listened to a lecture of his, or it wasn't really a lecture, it was more like an interview, even though I didn't read the book, I felt he wasn't as informed on the Quran. So he might be really good like in one area, but in order to tie those things together, you have to be pretty decently informed on like both things. So that's why I say I'm not as well informed about anarchy. So I need to learn more about that in order to start like kind of looking at the connections. So yeah, that's interesting. So inshallah, we will definitely discuss it more. But for today, I just want to focus on in general, the idea of the value of freedom in the Quran. So starting with chapter 3, verse 35, which is where the mother of Mary says, إِذْ قَالَتِ امْرَأَةُ عِمْرَانَ, when the wife of Imran, who is the mother of Mary, so the grandmother of Jesus, said, Rabbi, inni nadartu laka ma fi batni. She said, my Lord, I have vowed to you what is in my stomach. Muharraran. So the word muharraran is the word we're going to focus on a lot today. I'm going to explain that word in a second. So he said, I have focused, or I keep saying focus. I have vowed to you what is in my stomach, muharraran. So I'm going to in a second. Fataqabbal minni, so accept from me. Okay. So she said, I have vowed to you what is in my stomach, and the word is muharraran. Muharraran. So that's the word right there. So muharraran means, so I should have wrote the translation with it. So the very, very basic translation of this word means free. Okay? And it comes from the root har or hur. If you say hur, someone who is free. So hur is someone who is free. Right? So muharrar means someone who has been freed. That's maybe the more accurate way of saying it. Because hur is someone free. Muharrar is someone who has been freed. That's the basic meaning of it, right? Now, what's interesting about this, okay, so let's think about this verse again. But first, let me get some water. So, in this verse, the grandmother of Jesus, the wife of Mary, is saying, my Lord, I vow to you, right, I vow to you what is in my stomach, freed, having been freed. So accept this from me. That's the basic meaning of it. Now, look at the different translations, because what does this mean? What does this mean that she's been freed? What does that mean? Okay, let's look at the different translations, just to show how different people approach this. So, because there are two main things here. That she vowed what was in her stomach. She made a vow of what was in her stomach. And what was in her stomach was freed. Okay? So let's look at how different translations approach this. So one translation says, instead of translating it as vowed, they said, I pledge to you what is in my stomach, consecrated. That it's consecrated, or basically like made sacred, right? Another translation says vowed, which is what I already translated as, and also uses the word consecrated for freed. Okay. The third translation says, I dedicate to you what was in my stomach, instead of vowed, and they translate muharraran as entirely to your service. Another translation translated vowed as dedicated, similar to the previous one, but the muharraran part is a little different. In this one, they say entirely to you. The previous one said entirely to your service. The fifth translation that I looked at said vowed. I vowed to you what was in my stomach. And muharraran, they said dedicated to your services. The sixth translation said vowed, muharraran, exclusively for you. I skipped one thing. Sorry. In the fifth translation, this is important. I skipped this part. In the fifth translation that I read, it translated nadartu as vowed and muharraran as dedicated to your services, as I already said. But in parentheses, to explain dedicated to your services, they put meaning free from all worldly work. So their interpretation is muharraran is dedicated to your services because she is freed from all worldly work. And the seventh translation is dedicated, and then muharraran is for thy special service. Okay, So you see a commonality. So you see a commonality in how these translations approach these two main words in this verse, vowed and muharraran. They either said for vowed, they either said pledge or vow or dedicate. That was the three main ones out of 7 translations. They either used the term I pledge to you what was in my stomach, I vow to you, or I dedicate. And then for muharraran, they either said consecrated, that was twice. One said entirely to your service, entirely to you, dedicated to your services with the parentheses free from all worldly work, exclusively for you or thy special service. So you see some commonalities in how they approach it, and you also see some differences. Now, why do they translate muharraran as like consecrated or dedicated to your services or entirely for you? Because how this is normally explained, muharraran, because the basic meaning of the word, as I started off by saying, is it means to be free, right? So it's the opposite of servitude, right? Even if you look, I looked at one Arabic definition from Al-Qurtubi, Tafsir Al-Qurtubi, very famous tafsir, right? And in this tafsir, he said this word, the root of this word is ma'khudun min al-hurriya wa hiya diddu al-ubudiyya. This is taken from the concept of freedom, and it's the opposite of servitude. And they also explain this word as khalasa, meaning to be completely pure and free of anything mixed with it. So they give an example in Arabic. We would say tinun hur, clay. If we talked about clay, which is hur, which is translated sometimes as free. But what does that mean when we say there's some clay that's hur? That means in Arabic, la ramla fihi. That means there's no sand mixed with it. It's pure. It doesn't have things mixed with it. It's pure, it's nice and smooth, right? Wa alaikum salam. So hur, right? So the basic meaning of this word is to be free of any servitude, to be pure of anything, pure and free of anything being mixed with it, etc. So that's why all these translations translated it in different ways, but in very close ways, because all of them understood the word free here, meaning that she's free of like worldly work and stuff like that, and she can dedicate herself to serving like the temple, to serving Allah, stuff like that, right? Okay, good. So that's why they say here, freed means entirely to your service or dedicated to you, etc., because that's all she would have to do. She wouldn't have to be engaged in worldly work. That's the normal subhanAllah. That's beautiful. Clay with the sand will not hold his form. So that's the usual explanation for why it says free here. And I mean, that's a good explanation. I don't have an issue with that explanation. But the reason I want to talk about this a little bit is because I think that's actually a beautiful explanation, right? But I also think that this explanation isn't taken to its logical conclusion or implication. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today when I say the value of freedom in the Qur'an. Because Mary in the Qur'an is given to us as this beautiful example of a woman who is dedicated to Allah, right? Look at her story in the Quran. Look at all the stuff that she did. She's even given as an example at the end of Surah 66, I believe it is. Yes, it's at the end of Surah 66, where in the last three verses, starting from verse 10, Allah gives us examples of different women. He says, ضرب الله مثلا للذين كفروا امرأة نوح وامرأة لوط. Allah sets forth an example for those who did kufr, the wife of Noah and the wife of Lut. And then in verse 11 he says, وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. And Allah puts forward the example, an example for those who have believed, امرأة فرعون, the wife of Fir'aun, right? That's in verse 10, 66:10, that the wife of Fir'aun is put forward as an example for those who believe. And then in verse 12, he says, وَمَرْيَمْ ابْنَةَ عِمْرَانَ الَّتِي أَحْصَنَتْ فَرْجَهَا. And Maryam, the daughter of Imran, the one who fortified her private parts. Okay? So she's put forward as an example for those who have believed, along with the wife of Fir'aun. So she holds a high station in the Quran as an example. So the fact that part of her story is she was made free of worldly work to serve Allah, I think is so beautiful, and I think it teaches us about the value. Yeah, exactly. Fihi, and in one ayat is fiha. One ayat is فَنَفَخْنَا فِيهَا and فَنَفَخْنَا فِيهِ. So yeah, that's good observation. And that's a whole different thing we can talk about too. But notice how she was someone who was made as an example. She has this great station in the Quran. And what is her... Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll try to do that. I'll try to do something like that. Yeah, that's the fihi is a whole different discussion, because one ayat is fihi, one ayat is fiha. So I don't want to take us out of the main discussion, because that'll be a whole different thing. Inshallah, yeah, alhamdulillah, for sure. So like, if you think about it, like, she's put up as this great example in the Quran. You're fine, and one of her main qualities that she's given, even before she's born, is she's pledged or vowed, whatever word you want to translate it, to be free. Now, the interesting, at least to me, logical implication from that is, what does it mean? Okay, so when they say she's freed from worldly work, what kind of work would that have been in that time? What kind of work for a woman living in that age of humanity, when pretty much men still ran everything and, you know, were considered like the caretakers and all that type of stuff? What kind of work would she have been freed from? You follow my point? So that's the part of it that I think we don't think deeper about, is that's the value of freedom. Being freed from the expectations of her gender role. You get what I'm trying to say? Because at that time, you would expect, at least I would expect, just given the history of humanity, that there... okay, so let me try to explain it again. So when it says she was when the mother of Mary said she vowed... that creepy ice cream truck. When the mother of Mary said she's going to vow what was in her stomach to be free, okay? To be free. What is she free from? What is she free from? So they say she's free from any worldly work so that she can worship Allah, serve the temple. And then when you keep reading, like in Surah Ali Imran, if you keep reading, look at how, like, she's told, for example, Ya Maryam, O Mary, uqnuti li rabbiki, be obedient to your Lord, wasjudi, and make sujud, warka'i ma'ar raki'in, and bow down with those who bow down. But ar-raki'in is a masculine word, ar-raki'in, because the feminine for that would be ar-raki'at, bow with the other women who bow. So it's like she's included in the masculine description. Warka'i ma'ar raki'in. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so one perspective on this, and Allah knows best, one possible potential perspective is that if it's saying she's being freed in order to serve the temple, in order to serve Allah, however you explain it, and she's being told here, and this is in verse 343, وَارْكَعِي مَعَ الرَّاكِعِينَ, bow down with everyone who bows down, and that's in the masculine, right? So she's being freed from work in order to dedicate herself to this worship, right? What kind of work would she have been being freed from? Like, just given traditional gender roles in those kind of societies that have passed, right? Like, even now, today. Right. But she's freed from what, though? What is she freed from? Do you see my point? Yeah, but she's being freed from traditional gender roles. That's one of the things. And the way also we can tell this, I believe, is let's keep reading the verse and maybe this will make it clear. So she said, the mother of Mary said, ربي إني نذرت لك ما في بطني محررا فتقبل مني إنك أنت السميع العليم. She said, my Lord, I vow to you what is in my stomach to be free, so accept it from me. Now look at verse 36. فلما وضعتها, and when she gave birth to her, قالت ربي إني وضعتها أنثى. She said, my Lord, I gave birth to a female. Wallahu a'lamu bima wada'at. And Allah knows best about what she gave birth to. وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنثَى. And the male is not like the female. وَإِنِّي سَمَّيْتُهَا مَرْيَمَ. And I have named her Mary. So you see how in the context, why was Mary's mother taken aback or surprised by this? Because she's vowing what's in her stomach. Perhaps she thought that this would be a male, right? She's vowing what's in her stomach, right? But then when she gives birth and she realizes it's a female, she says, my Lord, I've given birth to a female, right? And it says Allah knows best about what she gave birth to. So that comes right after the verse where she says, I vow to you what's in my stomach to be free. So you see how in the two verses, right, there's a mention of freedom and there's a mention of gender roles. So what is she? Yeah, that's my point. So what is she being freed from? You follow my point? She's being freed from worldly work, yes, and that's what they say in the tafsir. Like if you look in the different explanations, that's one of the things that they talk about, is she's being freed from worldly work. But what kind of worldly work? If I say, if you're in a traditional society that has traditional gender roles, and you say that there's a woman in that society who has been freed from work, what kind of work is she being freed from? She's being freed from the traditional work that a woman would have been expected to do in that time. Does that make sense? Am I explaining it? Because I don't know if I'm explaining it clearly what I'm thinking. So give me some feedback and tell me if that makes sense. I'll wait on that one. Because I really want to know, am I making sense? Because if I'm not making sense, I want to try to explain it. Okay. In what way? You said your woman studies voice might be showing. Can you elaborate a little bit? She was freed for holy work, right? I'm agreeing with that, but freed from what though? Oh, okay, yeah, I see what you mean. For sure, yeah, I agree with that. Like she was a single parent for sure. But what I'm saying, only thing I'm trying to say is that when you look at the discussion of Mary, right? Yeah, when you look at the discussion of Mary, she's not discussed with, in my very humble opinion anyway, with the typical like gender stereotypes. Because even what you're saying about the single mother thing, the gender stereotype, like even think about how people talk about it today. People still do that today. People talk about this, there was that whole controversy that happened not too long ago where people were talking about, people kind of being down on like single mothers, right? And actually at the time I was thinking about this story myself. Like, well, how can you make that claim when in the Qur'an, like literally Mary was a single mother, right? So, I mean, even that is breaking the norms of traditional gender stereotypes. You follow my point? For sure. So Allah knows best. I think that is a very very profound thing to think about. That she was not she was not talked about in the Quran, yeah, there are some arguments that she could have been a prophet. There are people who argue that. I actually read not too long ago an argument in favor of that. I think, if I recall correctly, I think Ibn Hazm is one of the scholars that holds that position, but I might be mistaken. I have to check. Oh, I did? I made the oh dear face? Explain that. I want to hear that a little bit. Okay, explain that. What's the oh dear face? Talk to me, talk to me. Maybe. Yeah, maybe. No, I'm not quite sure if I'm not explaining it clearly or if it's just such a no, it's not that at all. No, it's not that at all. It's more so me, like, because I feel that the burden or the onus is on the person sharing information to communicate it clearly. So I automatically think about how I'm communicating, and if I'm not communicating it as clearly as I want to, or is it just that this perspective is such a new way to think about it that it takes a second for it to kind of settle in, right? So we have to kind of like work through all the different things. I'm not sure which one that is, but whatever the case, I think it's very interesting. Inshallah. SubhanAllah. I think it's very interesting that Maryam, when we study her story in the Quran, she doesn't fit the typical, in my opinion, the typical gender roles that are assigned. Like, she's a very autonomous, independent. She went by herself. It says, if we read in Surah 19, if we go to Surah 19, which is a whole surah named after her, she talks about, or it talks about her, sorry. It says, وَذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ مَرْيَمْ, and mention in the book Maryam. This is 1916, by the way. Mention in the book Maryam, إِذِ انْتَبَذَتْ مِنْ أَهْلِهَا. SubhanAllah. Yeah, we're all going through a process of unlearning. But it says here, وَذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ مَرْيَمْ إِذِ انْتَبَذَتْ مِنْ أَهْلِهَا مَكَانًا شَرْقِيًّا. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. That's a good question. That's something we have to study. But he says here, mentioned in the book Maryam, when she withdrew from her family, مَكَانًا شَرْقِيًّا, to an easterly place, right? فَاتَّخَذَتْ مِن دُونِهِمْ حِجَابًا, and she took a partition or a screen or a barrier between herself and them, right? So, like, even think about how she's being described. Like, she's this autonomous, independent woman who left her family to an easterly place, right? Makan and Sharqiyan. And that doesn't necessarily mean, we would have to study that more to see if we can pin down exactly what's being talked about there. But if you start to read her story, right, it's profound. It's profound, the type of person that she's presented as. If you read even what she's described when it said, into the sleeve of her garment, yeah. Even as she's described as Siddiqa, a woman of truth. That phrase, Siddiq, think about this phrase really quickly. Siddiq, or this word I should say. Siddiq, you can say, means like a person of truth, a person of a high degree of truthfulness. And only 4 people in the Quran are directly by name called that. Who are the 4 people? Ibrahim, Idris, Yusuf, and Maryam. Look at the company she's in. Only 4 people by name are called Siddiq. Ibrahim, Abraham, Joseph, Idris, and her. Wa ummuhu Siddiqa. That's what it says about Maryam. His mother, it's talking about Jesus, his mother is Siddiqa, a woman of truth. Ibrahim was Siddiq. Yusuf was Siddiq. Idris was Siddiq. Look at this company she's in. Look at the way she's being described, right? In my opinion, when you talk about that glass ceiling, she's breaking it. she's being talked about with the best of the messengers, right? And even she's being talked about with the elite. She's being put in that kind of a category. Even when you talk about the word Siddiq in a general sense, those were specific. But in a general sense, like when it talks about it in the Quran in the plural, as-Siddiqun, those people of truthfulness, he puts that as a level right after the prophets. Min an-nabiyyin wa-siddiqin wa-shuhada'i wa-salihin. He says from the prophets, the Siddiqin, the people of truth, the witnesses, and the righteous, right? You get what I'm saying? So like the level of a Siddiqeen is right after the prophets, and that's what she's called by name. That's what Joseph is called by name. That's what Ibrahim is called by name. That's what Idris is called by name. Ibrahim, Abraham, Yusuf, Joseph, Idris, and Maryam. Those are the four. And like I was saying earlier, I had read some arguments that people were arguing in favor of her being considered as a prophet. Oh, the levels? Yeah. So that ayah, let me actually give you that ayah. So that ayah is in chapter 4. So chapter 4, that's verse 69. Chapter 4, verse 69. So the whole verse actually says, وَمَنْ يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَ, and whoever obeys Allah and the Messenger, فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, then those ones are with the ones that Allah bestowed His favor upon. مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ وَالصِّدِّيقِينَ وَالشُّهَدَاءِ وَالصَّالِحِينَ وَحَسُنَ أُولَٰئِكَ رَفِيقًا. From the prophets, the Siddiqeen, the people of truth, the martyrs, not martyrs, shuhada, the witnesses. Sorry, I don't like that translation. Martyrs. وَالصَّالِحِينَ, and the righteous. وَحَسُنَ أُولَٰئِكَ رَفِيقًا. And what excellent companions these are. But you see the levels, the Siddiqeen are in the next level after the prophets. But that doesn't mean that they're always separate from the prophets, because in Surah Maryam itself, when it references Ibrahim, it says, إِنَّهُ كَانَ صِدِّيقًا نَبِيًّا, that he was a Siddiq Nabi. So you can be both, right? But it just goes to show you the high level that Maryam was called Siddiqa. So when you put these different pieces together and you think about the fact that she was called free, she was freed, to me, that shows she shows a very dynamic person that can't be just boxed into one particular box. Like on one hand, she's this single mother raising this child by herself. On the other hand, she's described in these elite categories with some of the best messengers that we've ever heard their stories in the Quran. And she's told, وَرْكَعِي مَعَ الرَّاكِعِينَ. Right, that's good. Oh, that's a good point. Her son was a prophet. That's a great point, actually. Beautiful. I love that. That's beautiful. You just made me think of something I need to connect together. But I don't want to mention it yet because I need to think about how to put it together. And I feel like I've already made it too confusing. So yeah, the hidden meaning. Oh, to list them one more time is Abraham. So Abraham, Idris. I'm not sure. I think in the Bible, Idris might be Enoch, maybe. But I prefer to stick with Idris because the name itself is really beautiful. Related to the word darasa, meaning to study. So Abraham, Idris, Yusuf or Joseph, and Maryam. Oh, it's Enoch, yeah. Right? Yeah, that's what I thought. Abraham, Idris, Yusuf, Maryam. Those are the four that were mentioned specifically by name as Siddiq. So to me, so Hannah mentioned what's the hidden lesson. So if you notice, I titled this class today, The Value of Freedom in the Quran. So to me, there's probably many hidden lessons, honestly. But to me, one of the main ones is just what I titled it, the value of freedom. When a person becomes free, truly free, it means you are free of all of the societal stereotypes that are placed upon you as a person of your either gender, race, time period, whatever it might be. Like connected to all of those things, we always have all these boxes we put people in. A man is supposed to do this. A woman is supposed to do this. Alhamdulillah, yeah, beautiful. And this is just, again, my perspective. I'm not saying like 100% I'm right, but just a different angle of the beauty of her story hit me today. I think the ayat in the Quran could have many different meanings, because no one can truly know the depths. You can never exhaust the words of Allah. I think they're always unfolding meanings. So to me, this verse really speaks to breaking stereotypes and breaking all these imposed, walaikum salam, all these imposed rules that we have. Like a woman can't do this, a woman can't do that, right? But you see that the one of the people in the Quran who is a great example for us, this amazing woman Maryam, was freed from all of that. And so therefore she was able to embrace the best of it all, right? She was able to go off by herself. She was able to bow with those who are bowing. She potentially serving in the temple. She's a single mother. She was dynamic when you really think about it. And I think if we really, this is something I'm coming more and more to really feeling strongly about what I'm about to say, is I really think like one of the ways that we can truly understand the Quran is by using our imagination. And if you think about different verses in the Quran that will say things like, Alam tara, like, do you not see? But the thing that it's asking you, do you not see, sometimes is something historical that you couldn't have seen. You weren't there. It will say like, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Do you not see what your Lord did to the companions of the elephant? How do I see that? I wasn't there. So you have to use your imagination. So in the same way, when we think about these characters like Maryam, right? If you really start to humanize them and think about them as a human being with real feelings and emotions and all that type of stuff, right? Then I feel like that will increase our depth of understanding the purpose of these narrations that we find with us in the Quran, right? So if you think about her like that, you think about this very like dynamic person, right? That might be controversial. Okay, let me hear it. What's the suggestion? I'm not taking my shirt off. Oh. That was a joke, by the way. You know I'm silly. The Chosen? I'm still confused. Oh, the show. Okay, it's a show. I got it now. Oh, yeah. No, I don't really think. I mean, I get why you're saying like that would be controversial for some people. I get that. But for me, no, that makes perfect sense. Because yeah, I love that. From birth, she was contradicting gender and societal norms. Beautiful. That's amazing. Yeah, no, I love that suggestion because I think stuff like that will help us engage our imagination, right? So I think that's a really, really good suggestion. Yeah, exactly. How people lived in those times, how people thought, right? What life was like. Exactly. It helps you imagine that. Like today, for example, this is why I'm sharing this with you because it's really hit me today. I was reading about the Prophet Muhammad's life. So this is a really interesting book I'm reading. It's really about the Quran, the book, but he's bringing aspects of the Prophet Muhammad's life. I really like the way this guy writes because he really brings the story to life. It's really his way of thinking about the Quran and about the Prophet's life is really, really beautiful. Do I have it with me? I don't have the book with me, but I have another book by this author, and I'll show you that real quick. So you can see the author. The book is called man, I forgot that quick. It's about the Quran, but this is another book by the same author called Muhammad the World Changer. His name is Muhammad Jabira, maybe. I'm not sure. I have to see the Arabic. But the way he writes, he just has a really beautiful writing style. He just really knows how to bring life to what he's talking about. I really like his writing style. So Yeah. So that's beautiful. So in reading his writing style, in reading his writing style, I had put the book down at one point, and I just started thinking about the Prophet Muhammad as a person and what he was feeling, like trying to empathize. Um, yeah, that book is about the life of the Prophet, but there's another book by his I'm reading, which is specifically about the Quran. It's talking about like different different main themes basically concerning the Quran. No, this here is not the sealed nectar. Or you asking me, do I like the sealed nectar? This is Muhammad, the world changer. Um, so I was reading his book and I was reading his discussion about Sumayya, who, if I recall correctly, they mentioned her as the first martyr of Islam, who was a woman, right? SubhanAllah, right? And I've heard the story, many times being Muslim for, 30 plus years. You hear certain stories. You hear certain stories frequently, right? So I've heard this story many times. But what hit me today, I don't know if it was his writing style or I think maybe it was his writing style that made me think about it more intimately. But you know what hit me about that? So talking about this woman who was the first martyr of Islam, right? And it made me think, obviously, like it's a horrible thing that happened to her, right? And it also made me think, yeah, Khadija broke gender roles for sure. And it also made me think, like empathize with the Prophet, like how must that have felt? Like, you have this teaching, you get this revelation, and you start to share it with people. And one of the first people that start to accept it is a woman that you are, have contact with, or she hears about it, or however it came about, right? And then she starts taking that and teaching that to people, and they retaliate against her and kill her. And you taught her that stuff. What must that have felt like for the Prophet Muhammad? Like that had to be like it was terrible for her because she's the one that got killed. Obviously, that's the most important thing, right? But also, it makes me wonder like how other people felt. Like how did he feel? And imagining that really kind of like made me see the human, the real human aspect of him, the vulnerable aspect. Because like in the Quran mentions his emotions, right? He says, قَدْ نَعْلَمُ إِنَّهُ لَيَحْزُنُكَ الَّذِي يَقُولُونَ, for example. He says, we know that what they say about you makes you sad. This is how they talk about the Prophet Muhammad. The Quran talks about the Prophet Muhammad. It mentions his emotional vulnerabilities, right? That what people said would make him sad, and Allah had to console him, right? So, sorry. Is it good now? Okay. I'll repeat that again. What I was saying again. So I was saying. What must that have been like, right? So you know this particular person, you get this revelation, and you're sharing it with people, and you're gaining like these new followers. One of them is a woman that I'm not sure of the whole story, like how they knew each other, how that came about, but she hears about it, she believes in it, and then she starts to teach it to people, and then she gets killed, which is obviously very horrible for her, right? And also, it makes you wonder, a person like the Prophet Muhammad who had the tendency to experience strong emotions, as we know from the Quran. The Quran tells us that, because in some places it tells us, قَدْ نَعْلَمُ إِنَّهُ لَيَحْزُنُكَ الَّذِي يَقُولُونَ. It says, we know that what they say makes you sad. We know that what they say makes you sad, right? So we know that the Prophet Muhammad, because of what the Quran tells us, was a person who experienced very deep emotions. So you have one of your earliest followers, a woman who gets killed because of what you taught her, and you know that that's from Allah, so you understand that this is part of the mission. But as just a human being, it made me wonder, like the human side of the Prophet, how did he take that? How did that feel for him, right? So I'm just sharing that as an example to why I say, like, the more that I study and learn and just mature in my own life, I think the more I'm becoming more and more convinced that one of the main tools that we need to truly like feel the Quran is imagination. To really sit down and like imagine and visualize what's going on, not just think about it from a purely intellectual, like technical standpoint. Yes, that's helpful, right? Like we go through different words, we study different words. That's helpful, but also you have to mix the imaginative part with it, I think. And I think in doing that, I think you'll realize that there's way more information available in the Quran than we give credit for, because a lot of times we think that there's not a lot about, people will say there's not a lot about the Prophet Muhammad. Oh, that's okay, I'm going to post it, inshallah. Wa alaikum salam. But we say there's not a lot about the Prophet Muhammad, his life in the Quran. But if you really stop to think about the verses, there's a ton about him. Just like this one thing I just mentioned. It made me start thinking and trying to like picture him in my mind, not like just physically, but just as a person. Like this person who was this, a person who could experience these like deep, vulnerable emotions, could cry sometimes, could be upset by what people were saying and that they weren't accepting the message, right? What would that have been like to be around a person like that, right? That just makes you think all these things. Oh, subhanAllah, I want to watch it now. Is it on Netflix? Where is it available? Did you already say? I might have missed it. You might have said it and I missed it. But I definitely will try to check it out. Oh, it has its own app. Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely have to find that. Yeah, I'll have to find that for sure. Thank you. Okay. So, to sum that part of the class up, and I still want to go to this other verse. I got a few extra minutes today, so we can go over a little bit. We can go a little bit over today. So, to sum all that up, right? We see Maryam is this very pioneering person in the Quran, right? A person who really doesn't fit neatly into any box, and she's described as being free. So the class today is connected to understanding the value of freedom in the Quran. So I would say her story. See, I think when we talk about some of the issues that we discuss or we face in our modern times, right? For example, one of them being, you hear this talked about a lot, one of them being feminism. And you hear people say like feminism is kufr, or you can't be a feminist and a Muslim, all this different stuff. But in actuality, I don't believe that's 100% true. And part of the problem when it comes to that is that people don't fully understand what feminism is. And actually, I don't know if you guys follow Raz, but she just did a video about this recently. Was very informative. So if you want to hear that perspective of why people don't know what it is, I would encourage you to watch that video. But just in summary, there's so many different levels and layers and perspectives on feminism, right? You have first wave feminism, second wave, third wave. Yeah, inshallah, maybe I'll make one soon, inshallah, to follow up. So first of all, when you lump it all together like that, and you say feminism is this, well, that's not fair because it's not all one thing. So you want to be a little bit more nuanced in your discussion of it. So that's number one. But number two, I think if you just think about it in a very simple way as trying to achieve equal rights for all people, regardless of gender, if you just think about it very simply, I think the indications of that are in the Quran. So when it comes to the Quranic message, I think the message itself is supposed to evolve, right? Depending on our circumstances and as we learn more. So for example, in the Quran, right, there's not anything explicit, at least that I can think of, that completely outlaws the idea of slavery that I can think of off the top of my head. But there is a lot of encouragement for freeing a neck, as it's called, tahriru, same word as we're studying with Mary, tahriru raqaba, to free a neck, right? So the idea is, oh yeah, for sure, they do that, yeah, absolutely. So the idea is the Quran was, at least in my thought process, the Quran came about and was delivered in an era that had all of these stereotypes and classes and all that type of stuff. Women were looked at in a certain way, had all these different things, right? And so, there was slavery, there was all that. So what it did was it came and it revolutionized the social system. But it didn't necessarily completely change everything in that system, but it gave us the clues of how we can evolve to change everything. So it told us and encouraged us to free slaves, perhaps letting us know and giving us a clue, this is not something the Quran values for you to have to try to own another human being. And in that society, that probably would have been something that wouldn't have been considered out of the norm. So he's coming, he's saying, no, you should free people, right? And so the idea is, let's develop that idea and let's evolve to get to a point in humanity where we're all free. You see where I'm coming from? So I think the seeds of certain ideas are given to us, and it's upon us to develop them. Nobody, I don't want to say nobody. I want to think about how I want to word this. You don't really, if you really think about this, let me put it like this. When you look, let's just say you look on let's just use TikTok for example, because you mentioned the Muslim side of TikTok, and I'm with you on that. Muslim TikTok can be very toxic. There's some good stuff I run across sometimes, but let's just say you go on there, right? How many videos, if you were to go on there, do you come across where people are speaking against, say, either feminism, if they're not using the word, something around that level, or women not wearing hijab or something like that. So you see all these different videos. But tell me something. How many times have you scrolled TikTok and saw someone seriously, like a Muslim, seriously arguing in favor of slavery? I can't think of a video that I've came across on TikTok where somebody was making a serious argument that we should be able to have slaves. Not that I can think of, right? Not saying they don't exist, I'm just saying my own experience. It seems to be way more common that speaking against women and the fight for women's rights is something that different Muslim males tend to take up the cause to talk about in their videos. But I don't hear them making the same arguments about slavery. Why is that? Why is that the case? Which is a good thing, by the way. That's good that they don't. But I'm saying, why is there so much concern with speaking against women's rights, right? Or the evolution of how to think about women's rights versus speaking about something like slavery? Why don't they even care about that? Do they agree that slavery is outlawed? Do they agree to that? I don't know if they would agree to that. They would have to answer that. But I know one particular scholar that's rated to be very high level amongst them. As far as I remember, I have to double check to make sure. But if I recall correctly, he basically came out and said that slavery wasn't outlawed, which I think is, to me, that I don't know how you can make that argument in the time that we live in. But the reason I said all of that is because in the Quran, you see that gives the seeds of the idea to develop to a point where we outlaw slavery, in my opinion, because it's telling us in that time, which is over 1,000 years ago, to free, it's encouraging the freeing of slaves, right? But it's not outright telling you or telling them at that time that this is something that's completely forbidden. So in the same way, I'm wondering what the eyes in the pardon was. Was it for something I said, or was it from the comment about evolution? But anyway, so my point is, just like we would just like today. Oh, the scholar. Okay, I got you. Yeah. That's why I was being very cautious saying if I remember correctly. But I remember I just came across a video somewhere. And yeah, I was very surprised myself that he said that. I was like, wow. But what I'm trying to say is, here's my general point that I'm trying to work up to, is that why do we consider that to be something we wouldn't even, like most rational Muslims wouldn't even try to make an argument for that? Why? Because we understand now how crazy that is to try to own someone, and we see the seeds of that in the Quran, like free slaves. Like let's ideally change this system. Let's free people, and then there'll be no more, right? Um, so in the same way, I would say there are things in the Quran that to me speaks to the idea of the evolution of women's rights. It gives us the seeds to those things. So for example, the Quran talks about not inheriting women. لا يحل لكم أن ترثوا النساء كرها. My mouth's dry. It's not allowable for you to inherit women against their will. Now, that's in the Quran. Now, today, in our day and time, is that even a discussion? Does anyone seriously even consider that? To inherit? I mean, maybe in other places, I don't know. I haven't researched what's going on in other places. But I'm talking about in the parts of the world that most of us are in right now. I don't see anyone arguing. No, not the slave thing. I'm not talking about the slave thing. No, I'm familiar with that. I'm talking about inheriting women against their will. Like someone dies and your brother, for example, inherits her. Now she's his wife. Like in the US, in the UK, different countries like that, we're not having that serious conversation that should be a thing. But the Quran is telling us that's not permissible. So how do we benefit from that information today? Because that was the seed, because that was what was going on in their time. And so the Quran spoke against how women were being oppressed at that time. But perhaps that's the seed to tell us we should try to evolve where we are removing all oppression based on gender and evolve to a level of equality. And equality doesn't mean that you're actually completely equal, because that's the other argument some people try to make. Equality means equality of rights, that you have the same rights and opportunity as anyone else, right? He said someone tries to inherit me. So hopefully that's clear what I'm trying to explain. I'm not sure if it is. But I think that's the reason I said all of that is because I think that's one of the benefits that we can get out of the story of Mary, out of the story of Maryam, is this is a seed that's telling us what it's like for a woman to be free. That's one of the things I think we get from that. Because in the societies that we live in, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to achieve gender equality. And so Mary stands as an example for us as what it's like for a woman to be truly free, that she's independent, autonomous, and diverse, that she's not just put in a particular box, that she can be in the temple doing this thing over here and she can be raising a kid over here. She can withdraw from her family, right? She can be put in the ranks, talked about in the ranks of some of the greatest male messengers, right? She's someone who has so many different sides and parts to her. And perhaps that's one of the things that we're supposed to learn from her story. Like, this is a clue of what we're trying to develop to as human beings, right? For sure, yeah. So Allah knows best. That's potentially a way of looking at it. Another verse, the other verse, because I said two verses. We spent almost an hour on that. I didn't think that verse was gonna be that long of a discussion, honestly. But I think it's good though, because we discussed a lot of different perspectives, and that's good. So the other verse is 5:20. Yeah, inshallah, I would love to do more classes on Maryam. Maryam is another person that's very fascinating to me in the Quran, because Maryam to me represents a lot of, like, how I think of her or see her, represents a lot of what I would think of as like a mystic. She gives me that vibe, like she withdraws by herself, right? And then the spirit comes to her. She has this experience. So to me, she's like a really cool example of like kind of like a mystic approach to spirituality. And actually, there's a Sufi order that's named after her. What is it called? I forget the name of it. Maryamiya, I think. Al Maryamiya. So it's a Sufi order that they call themselves Maryamiya because the founder of that order says that he had visions of Mary. And so he founded the order, the Sufi order, based on her. So I think that's kind of cool. So yeah, Maryam is a really beautiful example in the Quran that I think is often pigeonholed in talking about her just in one way, right? We talk about her like in one way, but I think she stands as an example, as a revolutionary example for breaking gender stereotypes. So I think that's something we should think about more. And so yeah, inshallah. Oh, about that Sufi order, yeah, for sure. SubhanAllah. That's beautiful. So 520 is the other verse that we want to go to, and we'll try to talk about it real quick. So 520 says, وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ, and when Musa said to his people, يَا قَوْمِ اذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ, O my people, remember the blessing of Allah upon you, إِذْ جَعَلَ فِيكُمْ أَنْبِيَاءَ, when he made amongst you prophets, وَجَعَلَكُمْ مُلُوكًا, and he made you kings. Now, let me ask this question. Musa says to his people, remember the blessing of Allah upon you when he made amongst you prophets. Okay, listen to the wording really closely. He made amongst you prophets. So that means among you, right? Among this people, he's talking to his people, some of you were prophets. Follow me? He made fiikum, within you, prophets. And then he said, وَجَعَلَكُمْ مُلُوكًا, and he made you kings. He didn't say وَجَعَلَ فِيكُمْ مُلُوكًا. He made amongst you kings. He made you kings. So what's the difference? Why would he say he made amongst you prophets, but he made you kings? Did he make all of them kings? He's talking to his people. Ya qawmi, all of his people. He says, وَجَعَلَكُمْ مُلُوكًا. He made all of you kings. What does he mean he made all of you kings? He made you kings. Does it mean all of them were kings? How do we interpret that? So what's interesting is if you look at different explanations of this. So one explanation I found, if you go to Tafsir al-Tabari, so Tafsir al-Tabari mentions several different possible explanations for this. One of the explanations he says is وَجَعَلَكُمْ مُلُوكًا. He made you kings means يَمْلِكُونَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَهْلِيهِمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُم. Means they have control over themselves and their families and their property and wealth. يَمْلِكُونَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَهْلِيهِمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُم. That's one of the opinions Al-Tabari mentions. And if you look at Ibn Kathir, he mentions very similar opinions, right? Although there are other opinions, to be fair. But this is one of the opinions that what does he mean when he says he made you kings? No comment. So I would say that I try to benefit from everyone. So sometimes, yeah, I wouldn't say need is a strong word. I would say anyone can give you information that will help deepen your knowledge about the Quran. Sometimes I benefit from people who aren't even Muslim in relationship to the Quran. I read something. Sometimes I watch a movie and it inspires me to think about something from the Quran. So I try to look for inspiration and information because how creativity works. So how creativity works, my approach to the Quran, I try to take a creative approach, And how creativity works is you're trying to combine together pieces of something, whatever it is, or elements of something. You're trying to combine together elements in a way that maybe haven't been combined like that before, or is not usually talked about in that way, and therefore it's creative because you're literally like creating something from the different elements that hasn't been seen before, right? So how that process often works is our minds get into this rut of only seeing things in one way, and sometimes you need something to kind of break that rut and give you a paradigm shift, and all of a sudden you see it in a different way, right? So that can come from many different ways. It can come from, like I just said, watching a movie. It can come from reading a certain book. It can come from researching what different scholars have said about certain things. When I prepare for our classes, I always research, well, most of the time, I research what different scholars said about the verses that I'm studying, especially when it comes to language. Language, most importantly, right? Just because I don't always mention it is because once I take the information from different places and kind of put it together, then I'm putting together a piece here and a piece there, and it becomes mine in the sense that it's not just one perspective; it's a perspective that's collected from different places, and then I present it. So hopefully that answered your question. Alhamdulillah, subhanallah. So anyway, as I was saying, At-Tabari says, وَجَعَلَكُمْ مُلُوكًا, that he made you muluk, he made you kings, means يَمْلِكُونَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَهْلِيهِمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُم, means they have control over themselves and their families and their wealth or their property. So the way, according to this explanation, he made you kings, muluk, because alhamdulillah, inshallah. It was funny. It was just funny to me the way he said it. That's why I laughed, because he was like, so you do need the scholars. Like, that's why I said, like, need is a strong word. We all need each other if you think about it like that. As human beings, we all need each other. No one is an island. We all benefit from each other, right? So like I said, it's just about gathering information about whatever the topic is. So, وَجَعَلَكُمْ مُلُوكًا, he made you kings. This explanation is drawing on like the literal language meaning of what malaka means. So the word king is malik, and the plural for king is muluk, kings in general. Malik, muluk. And that comes from malaka, which means to control something, right? To have some kind of control over something, some dominion, some kingship. Yeah, for sure. So when he says وَجَعَلَكُمْ مُلُوكًا, he made you kings. He made you kings, meaning, yeah, you have ownership over your own selves. Because think about who he's talking to. He's talking to his people, and his people were saved from Fir'aun. They were saved from Pharaoh. They were in servitude under Pharaoh. So after coming out from servitude under Pharaoh, Moses says to them, وَجَعَلَكُمْ مُلُوكًا, he made you kings, meaning you have full autonomy and control over yourselves and your family and your possessions and wealth. Now, if that isn't a beautiful way to think about freedom, because muluk comes from milk, not mulk. What still they both that's something we can think about and study, which is the actual root. But the main idea is if you go back to the 3-letter root, because where does milk and mulk come from? Where do they both come from? They come from the 3-letter root mim, lam, and kaf, mulk, or malaka, right? What does that mean? It means to have control over something. As Musa says, la amliku in the Quran, Musa says, la amliku illa nafsi wa akhi. I don't control or possess the control over anyone except myself and my brother. So malaka, the 3-letter root word, has the idea of like control, ownership, stuff like that. So when he says he made you muluk, he made you kings, right? The idea is potentially that they were in servitude under Pharaoh. So they didn't have control. They didn't have ownership, as someone else said, over their own selves, their own bodies, their own families, their own possessions. And now once he freed you from that, that freedom is described as muluk. Hannah is amazing for sure. I appreciate. Let me side point, since everyone is talking about Hannah, and she deserves that. I appreciate. If I've never said this, I think I've thanked her before, but I appreciate Hannah so much. Yeah, qur'an is amazing. But I appreciate Hannah so much. Hannah's amazing. She's been our moderator for a while now, and she handles everything. But not only that, just the dedication to show up every day. I appreciate that so much. It makes the class so much easier. And, pinning the comments and like all the stuff that she does, like, it's just amazing. So we definitely appreciate her. So in this verse, right, when he's talking about them being freed from the servitude under Pharaoh, he refers to that as وَجَعَلَكُمْ مُلُوكًا, that that he made you kings, okay? He made you people who have ownership and possession. But if you think about that on a different level, so that's just the surface level, right? But if you think about it on a deeper level, that's such a beautiful description. Because why did I title today's lesson as the value of freedom in the Quran? Because look at how freedom here is being described. Freedom from the servitude of Pharaoh is being described, that all of you are kings. Now, there could be probably many different ways that you could describe that, right? But the description that we find in the Quran is freedom makes you like a king, or if we're talking about a woman, a queen, right? And the further implication, I think, by saying made you all kings is, yes, it's talking about the freedom and the ownership, but it's also talking about the equality and the freedom that people have to decide their life. Because now you're not under servitude, you're your own ruler, you're your own king or queen, and you get to decide how you live. That's what freedom is. To be that malaka, to possess ownership over your life, your destiny, your choices, your body, your family, your wealth. You have the say in the decision making power in that. So again, I talked about earlier how perhaps one way to think about the Quran is the Quran gives us the seeds for future revolutions. And I don't mean physical revolutions, FBI, by the way. I'm talking about, because even in science, we talk about scientific revolutions. I'm talking about revolutionary ideas. That's what I'm talking about. So I think the Quran gives us seeds of revolutionary ideas whose time maybe hadn't come yet. But the seeds of those ideas are there, right? And this verse is one of the verses that, to me, potentially has some support. Yeah, for sure. Potentially has some support for the idea of like an anarchy-like system. The idea of people being completely free to decide their own destinies, right? People being almost like kings after coming from this autocratic dictator of Pharaoh that they had, who was the person who wanted to rule everything and wanted to be thought of as almost like a god. Now they're freed from that, and they all become their own kings. They all become their own leaders and rulers, and those who get to decide their destiny and their fate and their decisions and their life. I think that's to me, it's such a beautiful seed to start to develop this revolutionary idea of the equality of people in deciding how they live their life. SubhanAllah. I'm talking about the value of freedom in the Quran. So we just looked at mainly two verses, 335 and 520. So that that's a starting point to think about it. As I study more and learn more about it, inshallah, I'll share more. Hopefully that was beneficial. I'm not sure if it was as clear as I wanted to be. I'm sorry if it wasn't. I tried to make it as clear as I could. But it's a new idea that I'm currently studying. So sometimes it takes time for the idea to mature in your own mind and to develop different perspectives and different ways of thinking about it and explain it. Alhamdulillah, I'm glad you did. Thank you. SubhanAllah. So, and inshallah, as we revisit it more, and also too, because it's a completely out of the box to alhamdulillah, I'm glad you said that. It's a completely out of the box like way of thinking about it. SubhanAllah, it's a completely out of the box way of thinking about it. So also that's probably why a lot of the questions came up, because it's such a paradigm shift, right? That we got to say like, hold on, wait, is it this or are we saying this? And to be honest, this is, before we go, I want to mention this too. I feel, and what I'm about to say is not really about anyone here, but I'm just speaking in general. I feel that when it comes to research, right, for sure, subhanAllah, for sure. I feel like when it comes to research, a lot of people don't get like how research works. So the reason I say that is because on one of my recent videos, I think it was the video about the previous scriptures, some of the questions, like sometimes when you present a perspective and you say, hey, here's some verses, let's think about it like this. SubhanAllah, for sure. If you say, let's think about it like this, they'll say Jamaliyatuddin. Yeah, inshallah. من المؤلف من مؤلف هذا الكتاب Jamaliyatuddin. So like you present certain perspectives, you present and you say like, oh, let's think about it like this, or maybe we can think about it like that, or did you consider this? Then automatically the follow-up questions will be like, well, what about this and what about that, which are good. Farid al-Ansari, okay, which are good, right? But also it's important to understand that, to me, how I think of how research works is it works in incremental steps. So meaning when you're researching something and you present this idea and you say, hey, I want you to consider this as a possibility because of A, B, and C, that doesn't mean that the researcher has figured out every possible answer to every possible question that can come from that. It just means they're trying to shift your paradigm to say, hey, let's start to think about it like this. And then maybe if we think about it like this, maybe we can all answer these questions together. It depends on what you mean by scholar. Alhamdulillah. I think the word scholar has been appropriated in a way that makes it seem like clergy, right? So in other words, like we think of a scholar very similar to how, alhamdulillah, how we think of how like in other religions they might think of like a priest or a religious figure, like this holy person. I think scholarship is about activity. It's about what you do. Even if you look up the definition of what a scholar is. So I think that could be a loaded term. I prefer to think of myself, as just like I keep saying, a student or a researcher of the Quran. I try my best to research various concepts in the Quran. Keep it simple. Alhamdulillah, thank you. I appreciate it. All right, so with that, I'm going to go for the day. Hopefully that was beneficial. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Yeah, for sure. Assalamu alaikum.